Okay, we're going to call to order this special workshop. This is a continuation of some of the charter reviews that we began at the first meeting in February. So March 9th, 4:30 p.m. And Carrie, can you take a roll, please?
Mayor Miller,
I'm here.
Vice Mayor Lindauer,
Here.
Councilmember Frizzlo.
Here.
Councilmember Politis,
Here.
and right now Councilmember Bryan is absent.
Okay. All right, so today we are going to go over the new Did you want to call, did you say?
Did you see him, Mike?
Nancy did.
I did.
Oh.
Okay, new business, so we're going to the ongoing charter discussion. So Attorney Voice has been kind enough to consolidate everything into this little package here. So do you want to just go ahead?
Great. Thank you very much.
I would like an explanation, again, this proposed ballot and charter language for the compensation.
Sure,
You want to
yeah.
talk about that later on, or is that, it was on the first page? So
Sure. No, we can jump into that first, actually. Mayor, council members, good afternoon. As the mayor mentioned, you have before you a packet of a number of charter, oh, is it on? Sorry about that. On now? Okay, very good. A number of charter amendment ballot summaries and charter language for your initial review and consideration, stemming out of your previous discussions that you had at your last meeting. And as the mayor mentioned, there was at least one idea that we had not formalized down to a charter amendment because we wanted to discuss with you a little bit more of some potential options. And that had to do with council member compensation, okay? So we do, I think, have an inconsistency between, or at least an apparent inconsistency between the language we have in the charter right now concerning compensation and then the ordinance that you have in place and how it's been set the last many years. That ordinance was put in place back in, as the information I was given, back in 2003, okay? And pursuant to the ordinance you have in place right now, I'll go ahead and read you the language and the formula by which it's set, okay? It says, each individual council member shall receive total monthly compensation in an amount equal to the average compensation of their counterparts in the following eastern Volusia County cities: Daytona Beach, Edgewater, Holly Hill, New Smyrna Beach, Ormond Beach, Ponce Inlet, Port Orange, and South Daytona. The amount should be calculated as of July 1st of each year and established by resolution of the City Council. And then
any idea why, oh, I'm sorry, why we haven't, so we have not been following that for how many years, do you know?
Well, let me double check and ask. Has it been handled that way? Let me finish on, tell you the
Go ahead.
procedure of it. Yeah. It's to be calculated each year on July 1st and established by resolution. And then it sets out what to do in 2003 and 2004 to initially handle that. And then says the mayor shall receive total monthly compensation in amount $100 greater than individual council member. So let me ask all of you, is that the procedure you all have been following?
No.
To set it by resolution every
We've
year?
never followed that. We've never done anything.
What's the
Okay.
date? What's the date of that ordinance?
2003.
2003.
Yeah, as long as I've been on, this is going on my third year, so the previous 2 years, it was never done. It's been the same compensation all along.
Do
And
you happen to know the last time that was followed, or?
I believe it was 3 years ago, because I've been here just over 3 years, and my first year here is when this all came to light, I believe, because that's when I tried to bring the resolution to amend it to be in compliance with the ordinance. So I don't believe we've done it the last 2 years, certainly not since the sitting council has been sitting.
So what would we need to do to make it effective July 1st? I mean,
sure, well, let me, so that is the ordinance that's in effect right now. Let me tell you the charter provision we have in effect right now and why I think there is an inconsistency between the two, okay? The charter provision that's currently in effect reads, the city council may determine the compensation and benefits of the mayor, council member, and other council members but no ordinance increasing salary amounts or expense allowances shall become effective until the date of commencement of the terms of council members elected at the next regular election, provided that such election follows the adoption of the salary ordinance by at least 90 days. This language, and then it goes on to have the $100 more, same thing there for the mayor. This provision is not particularly well drafted, but the best you can pull out of it is the idea that it contemplates that any increases in compensation for the council would be by ordinance, okay, rather than by resolution. And that it would not contemplate an ordinance putting it in place once and then changing it by resolution thereafter or anything like this. It contemplates that you would be taking effectively a legislative act to make that determination every time by ordinance what your compensation is going to be. And then it wouldn't increase automatically each time, all right? So it's not a radical inconsistency, but they are inconsistent. All right.
So we do want to make it consistent. Again, we're going to ask for your expertise. Other cities that you've done this with, can you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
what happens there?
Yeah, and I was going to, the two ways we reference generally in our memo here are each ways that you find it in different charters. I can give you examples of each, okay? We could do this two different ways. We could leave the charter provision as it is, i.e. not having to put it on the ballot. And by the way, I will tell you, there are a lot of practical benefits to not putting a charter amendment on the ballot concerning your compensation, because anytime you talk about your salary, your compensation, I will just tell you from experience, folks are going to look askance at it, unless you're saying change it to zero. Okay? So that's going to be one that's going to be highly scrutinized, and folks are going to be looking for the ways somebody's looking to make more money. All right? But, so one would be leave the charter language as it is, all right, and change the ordinance, all right? Either wipe out the ordinance and simply follow the charter provision, where every year it would be incumbent upon you to pass an ordinance that sets whatever your compensation is going to be that year, and it goes into effect the way the charter has it. Alternatively, you could amend the charter provision. Well, let me back up, because you've got a number of different options. You could, in implementing that, follow the scheme that's set here, all right? Set it up so that when you're complying with that charter provision every year, that the plan would be you're going to pass an ordinance that is calculated, based on the average of these other listed cities, all right? Alternatively, you could take this scheme of listing those cities and all of that and put it into the charter. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, I can think of at least one example, and I can find you a number of others. The city of Bunnell up in Flagler County has in their charter a specific calculation scheme. It was just added in the last couple of years. How it is their commission salaries are adjusted over time. We had talked about adjusting for various things, CPI or what have you. I wasn't, when we were talking about that before, aware of the fact that you already had one scheme that kind of moves with how markets would go and so on in your code of ordinance. So really, it would come down to you all. Do you all want to do a charter amendment on this issue, which
I don't
take
think
some
I want to do a
risks?
charter amendment, but I was
Or
going
we
to
could
ask.
change up your ordinance.
Okay, but could it be, I'm just throwing out ideas, instead of every year that happening, could it be every 2 years? And then also, could it become effective so it doesn't look like we're giving ourselves raises, so effective starting July of 2022, because some people will be rerunning and whatever?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing in your charter provision that compels you to change what your salaries are every year.
Okay.
At all.
So those are two of my ideas, every 2 years, but effective not till 2022.
Yeah, and
I'd
structure
like-
that to make it consistent with that charter provision that'd be after elections and so on.
Well, my preference would be that we have something set up like the compensation, the average compensation, or the CPI, or anything that is established that we do not actually talk about and set our own raises. I just don't like that. That just...
Well, if it was the average, though, we wouldn't be setting ours, is that correct?
Yeah, if you were to set up, and you could do this, we could change your current ordinance.
Mayor, average of what?
Those those 6 cities that he talked about, Ponce, Port Orange, whatever the cities were, it's an average of what they make.
Okay,
And that's what's in your ordinance right now.
that's phenomenal.
So we would-
I'm sorry.
Okay, so it takes,
That's
you know,
perfect.
2 things that I would want to do. So to your point, Mel, it takes us out of giving the raises. It's not right now. Most of us are going to be into either our second or end of our first term. So it isn't like we're giving ourselves raises. I don't want to really go through that every year. Every 2 years would work for me. Councilman Bryan, do you have any?
Yeah, every 2 years is fine. I sort of have a philosophical opposition to setting your salary based on New York City or Miami or whatever, because, that's comparing apples and oranges in my opinion, and particularly when it comes to staff. It makes a little more sense. Does anybody have any idea what those averages are at this point in time?
Sure, do you have any idea or not?
What
The average is compared to Ponce Inlet and was it Port Orange and South Daytona?
Basically, everybody east of 95 except Oak Hill.
Okay,
It's basically the entire list.
and you would have no idea.
let me look and see if I can grab it.
It's all public information, right?
Yeah, it's just gathering it.
I'm not sure if any of those cities are in the list, but there are some cities where the council members don't get paid, or get paid a very small token, which is fine with me, whatever is fair. I just don't want to set it ourselves.
Now, I will warn you, without passing an ordinance, okay? The way your charter provision is set up right now, for your salary to change, that change has to be by ordinance. Now, we can set up an ordinance in your code that says, when you do that by ordinance, it will follow this formula. So that when you all are taking that action, you will be taking that action, you can very clearly say, look, we have it set in our code of ordinances, this is how it's done, this is just a formality to do it. Okay?
I just want it to be hands-off, very clear that we are not raising our own salaries other than
Yeah, but
the
we're setting
charter.
forth something for people to follow us to.
Yes.
So this doesn't happen what happened, for the past 3 years, nothing happened. So we're setting a policy in place.
What, I don't think it's ever been implemented the way the 2003 ordinance is.
I don't think it is either, because I remember reading
If I can
somewhere
interject-
where it specifically says $12,375 and the mayor gets an extra $100 a month.
The adjustments were being made, at least prior to me.
Every year.
You say they were? or
They were.
They were, yes.
They weren't made in
Being
the
what,
2 years, the first 2 years I was in office, they weren't made.
I believe they were. And I believe Sherry is confirming that as well.
Well,
The last year,
must have been made without me being present, and I was present in every meeting.
They weren't done at a meeting, and that's where this whole issue came from, is they were just being done.
All of a sudden,
That's
a
how it
quarter
was-
more and you didn't notice it.
Yeah, it was just being done automatically without that required resolution. And
Yeah, I want to set
being
something
new,
in place.
trying to read everything and see what we were supposed to be doing, I said, oh, it needs a resolution. So I put a resolution together, and then the prior city attorney pulled it and said, no, it has to follow the charter. And that's where this whole discussion came from.
So it had
So
just
I would
been
like to
going
set
along all these years.
something in place. I'm saying 2022. Do you want it 2021, since it hasn't been
No,
done for 3 years?
No, I would leave it up to the next election. But it's going to be on the 2022 ballot, right? Any charter changes?
Well, we're not going to put it in the charter.
Okay.
Yeah, if we were not going to be implementing this by charter change, if we're just going to change the ordinance, they could go into effect immediately.
Well,
So you have to say something that should have been in place hasn't been done for 3 years. So we're only going back to what should have been done. So do you want it to start in 2021 and then every 2 years after that?
Yeah,
I'm fine with whatever everybody's comfortable with.
whatever's easiest. That works. And why haven't we done it in 3 years?
It was pulled the first year, and then the current, The interpretation we were going under was the ordinance was basically invalid because there was charter language. And so we were kind of under that assumption based on what the prior attorney had told us. So without council saying we want to change our salary, we weren't doing anything.
Yeah, I would like to set something in place. Let me ask you this, though. If it turns out that the average is lower than what we're already making, does it stay the same or does it go down?
If we were to tune this up to follow that procedure, right? Follow that formula, but make it in a way consistent with the charter, if it was lower, it would go down. So,
Yeah, that's why I pointed out that some councils have zero pay.
I don't think there's anyone in Volusia County from being at different meetings. Are you aware of anyone?
not aware of any.
I think when I went to maybe one meeting, somebody in tiny South Florida, but I don't think there's anything in Volusia.
Mayor, I have the numbers from 2018, which was the last year I did the salary.
Yes, thank you.
The lowest was the city of Edgewater, and they make $7,272 a year. And the highest was Daytona Beach, making $23,650. That year, you would have had about a $300 raise from where you are now,
Wow,
but it wasn't.
we're gonna have a full ballot, huh?
Don't tell Ellen, she'll go out and spend the money.
Yeah, right.
I'm telling you right now, keep this a secret amongst us. Don't let it leak to her.
All right, so again, my preference is that we don't put it on the ballot, that we start it in 2021 and every 2 years after that. So what do we need to do?
I want
is your next election?
My
Well,
$300
not
times
tell
3,
Ellen.
that's $900. I mean, we should go back to the
2022.
beginning.
Yeah.
Nice action.
Thank you, Sherry, for that information.
You're welcome.
Sounds like between the two
Has
that
it
they
ever
were-
been implemented?
Yes, it was. Every year up until 2018. Every November, if the average went up, you all got a raise.
Kurt hasn't done it in the last 3 years because he thought we needed a resolution, have to be on the ballot, wasn't sure the direction we wanted to take, so therefore he just didn't do it because he wasn't sure what we wanted to do. So now this is perfect because now we're giving direction and it's perfect.
One thing I don't think you'd be able to do, though, is have it effective in 2021 because of that last provision I mentioned, that it wouldn't go into effect until after an intervening election.
Well,
But the election is not actually until November of 2022.
Understand?
So what does that mean, not till 2023? No.
December 2022.
Okay,
Yeah.
Because the election is in November.
November.
Okay, works for me.
Anyone else, any other?
Yeah, well, Sherry, did, any of the years, was there a decrease? Do you recall?
I don't remember, but our method was that if it was a decrease, we just kept you where you were. We never took away money.
Could we do that or not?
Sure.
We only increased, we never did.
Again, we're going to be changing.
You can do whatever you want, we'll back you. Go ahead.
Ellen needs that $300.
Absolutely.
We would be changing up the ordinance anyways. This ordinance that apparently had been followed and then not followed because it's inconsistent with the charter provision and so on. We're going to be changing that up to make it consistent with it. We could add it to it. Basically, the salary, it would change to be the salary would be adjusted upward to the average every time the average went up.
Or remain the same if, or you put it in there, all right. So could you recap for us, so it would be 2022, that would it be November of 2022 that it would be looked at again, effective December 2022. It's going to be resolution, no.
What it would be is you would pass an ordinance that would change up your procedure and your code of ordinances for how this would work. And then you could pass an ordinance, a separate ordinance, I would suggest, at that time, or a month later, or a year later, or whenever, but the change in the salary would not become effective until after the November 2022 election. You could pass that now.
Yeah, that's what I'm
It
saying.
just, it would just, I mean, you could pass it now, and then everyone's just going to twiddle their thumbs and wait until that happens, and then the number will go up.
This is an ordinance as opposed to a change in the charter.
That's correct.
The ordinance would line up with the charter, so you wouldn't have
The
this.
plan here is to conform your plan.
That was our
to try to model this, but actually check all the boxes of the charter.
Okay.
And that was our intent all along. We knew we had some that were out of sync.
Sure.
So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. We can massage it with this direction here. If there's no objection to the idea that it would stay the same, go up if the average goes up, and so on, and then it would go into effect, and, after each election, we can put together those changes, and that can come to you by ordinance to get that in there, and then you can be planning on making that happen.
Okay. That works for me.
Do we have to take a vote on this, or are we just okay that we got a consensus?
Wade, is the mayor treated as a council member in 2003 resolution or ordinance?
I'm sorry?
Is the mayor treated as a council member in the 2003 ordinance, or are they treated separately?
The mayor is treated as getting $100 more monthly than the council member, as a council member. After doing the
Plus 100, right?
Yeah, it's the council member number set per the formula plus 100 per
So there
month.
isn't a separate average for mayors, basically,
No, no.
And we don't need a vote, you're just giving us direction.
Okay.
And would you, for the timing of this, it wouldn't be ready in time for the council meeting in 2 weeks, but I could have it ready for the first one in April if you wanted, or do you want to wait for that?
there's no rush. It's not going to be effective until 2022.
Yeah, I understand, I wasn't sure if you wanted to get it
No,
right
no,
away,
when,
so
yeah.
that-
Anytime in the next
Right.
couple months, whenever you
Yeah,
have it.
it's just housekeeping now.
Okay, well, we're on page 1.
One other thing to report, in other things that we were looking and trying to clean up, as we were looking deeper into the charter, and particularly a 2015 ordinance that Sherry passed on to us, we noticed that there's a whole part of your charter, as it's listed on Municode, that doesn't belong in your charter. And what I mean by that, and it's no problem, but what I mean by that is you all passed an ordinance in 2015 that utilized
Previous council, probably.
previous council, I'm sorry, the council, yeah, that utilized an exception to the general rule I mentioned to you before. The general rule is anytime you're changing the charter, you have to put it on a ballot for referendum. There are exceptions to this rule, all right? And one of the few narrow exceptions was amending basically the dates of elections for filling council member seats and then making other changes to accommodate that. That was put in by the Florida legislature a couple years ago. And y'all were utilizing that to deal with an issue of a vacancy and what have you. In that same ordinance, there was a whole bunch of other provisions that were included there that dealt with election procedures and all of this. Somehow, Municode got hold of that and thought that all that stuff was supposed to go in your charter. It was not. The ordinance very clearly said it was supposed to go in your code of ordinances. So we've already spoken with Sherry. Sherry's contacting Municode. Whole big chunk of what appears to be your charter
Taken out.
is going to be taken out and put into its appropriate place in the code of ordinances. So that was another kind of cleanup issue there.
What is the controlling document for the charter?
I'm sorry?
What is the controlling document for the charter?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, is it Unicode? Is it some, tablet someplace? I mean, what is the controlling, what's the official charter and how is it documented?
Sure. That's a great question, Sherry. Do you have an opinion on that? Because I would suggest you just be an opinion. What is your charter is a question of substantive law. Like right here, I looked at Municode, which is your code codifier, and I saw the instrument that put it in there, and Municode did it wrong, and therefore it didn't belong in there. The mere fact they had put it there doesn't mean it's in your charter.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. So, but if it's not the controlling document, what is,
Every single ordinance you all have ever passed that affects the charter, and then whether or not it passed on the, I hate to say it, there is no instrument that by virtue of its existence is the charter. It's a question of law.
And Attorney Boyce, not to throw anyone under the bus, but why did it our previous attorney not noticed that 6 years later that,
I don't know the name, I just don't know that anybody noticed. I don't know that I would have caught it.
okay.
I'll be honest, because it was just a whole provision, just got put in there, and
Okay, well, that was our purpose, to clean up, and we're doing a lot of cleaning.
exactly. So with that, and I'll be, I apologize, relatively quick, because I
Can
need to get back over the bridge.
I don't think that would happen with us, because when we do ordinances, we direct Muni Code exactly where to put it in the ordinances. Some attorneys just leave it up to Muni Code where to put it.
But you direct, you give the direction.
Right, so since we would put in the ordinance itself, create a new ordinance provision 3.18, whatever, we would see it when it came into the code, but because it was just left open-ended, I don't know that anybody noticed.
Okay,
So-
all right. Well, thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
So we do have a number of questions for your consideration. We can take a look at the first real quick, if you'd like. This first question had to do with the matter of number of council member votes necessary to remove a council member for misconduct. I hope you all had a chance to take a look at this. The changes in the text of the charter are relatively simple, but of course, explaining that to voters, is another matter. We are limited, as we discussed previously, to 15 words for the title and 75 words for the summary. And I wanted to ask you all if you had any questions about the ballot title and summary we had put together.
I guess I have one question, and that would be, do we have the authority, without being in violation of the Florida Sunshine Law, to go out and explain these things to the voters prior to the vote of the election?
So, a couple things. There's nothing inherently violative of the Sunshine Law for you all individually to go speak to members of the public or to the media or whatever to explain any of these charter questions. Just as you would explain any issue that may come before you on an ordinance or anything else. The only special issue that comes up for charter issues is because it's an election matter, what the city would not be able to do is use money, okay, to advocate for or against the passage of any of these charter amendments, all right? It's a specific provision that was added to the Florida Election Code a number of years ago that limits the expenditure of local government funds to advocate for or against certain things. But you going out yourself, you speaking in a meeting, you speaking to the paper, that doesn't mean you spend money in any reasonable sense. So,
Would you had an open meeting where people could come in and it would be explained? Maybe-
Absolutely.
Maybe by you or somebody?
yeah, perfectly permissible.
You
It
could
encouraged.
Print out in your utility bill saying, here's why you should vote for this. That's the distinction. Because putting a printout would cost money. But you explaining it in your capacity as a councilman would not.
And the mode I would suggest with regard to any of these charter members, obviously because you're going to be putting them on the ballot, you're proposing them, okay? And so that presumably, you're suggesting that folks pass them, but that's not the test, all right? The issue is when you spend money to advocate for it. Merely having a meeting to explain to the voters or putting out a video or whatever saying, this is what it does, perfectly fine.
Can, if the mayor has consensus, can she put it in Shore's notes where you actually?
Absolutely.
In our
Yeah.
free Shores notes.
And commonly I see, mayors or other council members write letters to the editor or, op-ed pieces or whatever explaining
Yeah.
what they do. And we tend to encourage them to be explanatory statements. These are the things that we put on the ballot. This is what they do. Probably stay away from, this is why you should vote for it.
Yeah,
That way, you're not putting your finger on the.
I would think that because of what you're limited in terms of how much you can put on the ballot, that people might be saying, well, what's that all about? Or why are they doing that? Or something. So an explanation would certainly be in place, even though you're not pushing for it, you're explaining why it's on there.
Sure.
And it's not some big secret or.
And I normally have coffee with the mayor once a month. That would be okay at that time, just to give an
Yeah,
explanation.
that'd be perfect for us, yeah.
I would think that and the Shore's notes is a lot, that's a lot of firepower.
Okay.
So with regard to this first one, did anybody have any questions on the ballot title and ballot summary explaining this question?
And we always put it in both English and Spanish?
That's correct. Yeah, that's evolved over years, but where we are now under federal law is it's got to be printed on the ballot in both English and Spanish on all ballots.
Okay, and then looking, going past to other things here. So at the bottom, when all you did was anywhere that it did say 3, we changed to 4 later on in here instead of council, commission. So that's where a lot of this came in. I mean, that's where I see so many pages, even though, okay.
Exactly, yeah. A lot of that stuff was we had one of our paralegals sit down and do the work to find every version.
Every time 3, 4.
Council.
Search and replace.
Because I looked it over and I wasn't quite getting that, and then I,
Could do that with paper.
So if there aren't any questions on that first ballot title and summary, we'll move on to the second. This was, again, a small issue, but related to eliminating that specific meeting time, the 7 p.m. meeting time for council organizational meetings. And by the way, we talked about this before. When you worry about ballot fatigue and how many questions you put on the ballot, it's ultimately up to y'all's judgment as to which of these is important enough to fill up the ballot with in 2022. We have no idea what the ballot's going to look like in 2022 in November. But
well, let me ask you this. So probably for the past year, we've changed to 6 o'clock. Did we do that by ordinance? So now the ordinance doesn't match the charter, and that's what we're trying to clean up?
well, this,
How did we do this for the past year?
I don't know. What did you all do for your organizational meeting?
The meeting time is by resolution, and to be perfectly candid, we probably violated the charter when we did it, because we didn't call a special meeting to commence at 7 o'clock, which is probably what we should have done, and...
It was before your time.
No, it wasn't.
Was it? No, I think it was.
No, it wasn't.
Don't let him off the hook.
It was probably just right after.
right.
But in any event, yeah, this doesn't mandate 7 p.m. meetings for all your meetings. It's literally just your organizational meeting, your first meeting after election, and so on.
We'll just make it
That's the
that
penalty for charter violation.
It is what it is, I guess.
All right, Attorney, here, it was you. All right, so this looks pretty straightforward to me. Does anyone have?
Does anyone, if no one has any other questions, we'll move on to question 3. This question related to, this was actually a suggestion that John had brought up, basically putting a little bit of rails on an entitlement, good rails, so people know what their timelines are. On an entitlement you have under Chapter 166, voters can go around and get petitions, 10% of the voters in the municipality, to put a charter amendment on the ballot. And this provision provides a little bit more clarity as to what ballot those would go onto. And again, trying to space it out a little bit, so if there's an election somewhat nearby, it's going to go on that election, so you're not spending extra money, because special elections cost a fair bit of money, and otherwise giving enough breathing room for the supervisor of elections to be able to put together an appropriate election. John, did you have a chance to speak with the supervisor's office?
Well, I talked to Lisa, the supervisor, and she agreed with the timeframes that are in here. She said,
Oh, good.
If there's a general election scheduled within 120 days, that would allow her enough time, because she just really needs until the end of qualifying, or by the end of qualifying, I should say, if it's going on to the general election. And that 90 days would be enough time to call a special election if we could do that. She said 60 she could probably do if she had to, but 90 would be a better time frame for their office. So that's kind of the explanation behind that.
And I think we're all in agreement, too, that we don't have anything earth-shattering here or that highly important that we would want to pay for a special election. Well, I'm speaking for myself. I don't think we are. Does anyone have any different opinion?
No, I agree. I think that we want to go as long on the days as we can possibly go legally.
But we want it to be, for the in 2022. We don't want a special election to put this on the ballot.
No, definitely not, no.
Well, I think we're mixing up two different things.
Okay,
here.
okay.
I think you're talking about putting the charter language on the ballot.
Right, I'm sorry, yeah.
This
so-
is for if a citizen.
Citizen, okay.
Provides a charter change.
Citizen initiated.
Okay.
yeah.
all right.
They get a
Then it would-
petition.
If the petition is certified 120 days out, according to this, then it just goes on the general election ballot.
Okay.
If there's not an election within 120 days, then we have to call a special election within 90 days.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that what the statute says? I mean,
There are no constraints in the statute on when it is, which has led to a lot of litigation all over the state.
Even the 10%'s not?
Oh, no, the 10% is set in the statute.
Yeah.
What ballot it goes on is not set, which leads to all sorts of fun litigation all over the place. Yeah, there are not many rails on it. This is why this is usually a good thing to put in your charter, to put some rails on it. So everybody knows what election to plan against
Yeah.
when their collection is.
What's the current setup?
The current setup right now, pardon me,
If there's an election within, so it would call for a special election within 60 days.
Oh, okay, so we're,
which is quite a hustle for the supervisor's office to put together.
But I'm sure Lisa was quite happy with this.
if Lisa's happy, then we should be happy.
Has any of the litigation reached a point where it would be controlling law?
None of it has, none of that litigation has said, it actually gives a whole lot of latitude to cities.
Okay.
So if there aren't any questions on that ballot title and summary or anything else on that, move on to, actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to skip to question 5 real quick, because question 4 I want to chat about a little bit more. Question 5 is our renaming city council to city commission. Relatively straightforward. I would just ask if you all have any questions about the ballot title and summary there. I did add in a clause to try to be clear for the voters, with such changes having no effect on the powers, duties, or compensation of such officials, just so it's crystal clear for everybody. Because there are a lot of folks that I've run into over the years who labor under a misapprehension that there is some legal distinction between commissioners and council members. You could call them whatever you want, and it makes no difference. So to dispel any of that concern, it's not changing anything other than changing names. So if that seems relatively clear to you all, I'll turn back to.
Can I also mention, Lee, that we also made an editorial decision the current charter is completely inconsistent with respect to the mayor. Sometimes it's just called the mayor, sometimes it's called mayor / dash council member. And there seems to be no rhyme or reason when they use one or the other. I think the mayor council person distinction is redundant because the mayor provision of the code already lays out the mayor's duties and says that the mayor is a member of the council. So just for, I think, clarity, we eliminated any reference to mayor / council person, just reduced it to mayor. And we didn't get direction from the council last time on that, so I just wanted to make sure that was okay with everybody as an editorial matter.
No, as long as it's clear in one place that the mayor's a council member, or a commissioner in this case.
Right. It is.
I'm fine with that.
Very good.
I'm fine with that too.
So moving back to question 4, this is the charter amendment that related to effectively your purchasing policies and bidding requirements and so on. On this one, I'm going to go ahead, because this one, probably the most interesting and substantive, if you will, of any of them. I'll read the ballot title and summary for you all. I found that sometimes reading it aloud helps you catch things differently than just reading it on paper. City Charter Amendment providing for city purchasing to be governed by council-approved purchasing policy. Shall the city charter be amended to remove specific bidding and purchasing procedures from the charter and provide that bidding and purchasing procedures will be governed by the city's finance policy and procedure manual as approved and updated by the city council. And to implement that, it deletes all those specific bidding and purchasing procedures in the charter and then adds a sentence that says, Bids, contracts, and other expenditures shall be approved by the city council, except as provided in the city's finance policy and procedure manual, as approved and updated from time to time by the city council.
With no dollar amount attached, just as it is. Did we previously have an amount attached?
You had certain dollar amounts in the charter for certain things. And that the dollar amount was primarily relating to competitive bidding, okay? Purchases under $25,000 didn't require competitive bidding. Expenditures for professional services and personal services in any amount. Work done in the operation of any city department, pretty broad clause. And then basically a lot of particulars here. And the intent of this was to basically say, these particulars, I'll be honest with you, consistent with most municipalities in the direction they've gone, doesn't belong in the city charter. This should be a policy matter for the council to decide how you all are spending your budget and what procedures you're following to do it and so on. And this is specifying that it's not going to be in the charter, it's going to be in a policy instrument that you all approve in.
Yeah, I think the key here is it says as approved and updated by the city council. So it's not only approved once, but it's updated whenever it's necessary. I think that's very clear.
That's correct.
This is one probably most likely to raise a red flag with the voters of the ones we have.
Sure.
So I guess the general question is, do you view this as having each one as a separate ballot issue? Each one of these as being a separate ballot issue?
A separate question?
Yeah.
Yes, that's
As
why
opposed
they're
to grouping. Okay.
that's why they're prepared this way.
Yeah.
And you know, the 7 p.m. one would be one I'd love to be able to group in with any of the other ones here. None of them are jumping out at me as particularly amenable to it right now, because you really tempt fate when you take two issues that have nothing to do with each other and put them together. You're begging for voter confusion.
That doesn't stop them from doing the constitutional amendments that way.
Oh, I agree. But I will tell you, if I had been general counsel for the Constitutional Revision Commission, I would have wildly advocated against it, notwithstanding the fact that you're allowed to do it.
How many questions can you put on the ballot? I know that.
As many as you want and as many as you're willing to pay for.
All right.
And what I mean by that is my past experience with the Volusia, and it varies from supervisor to supervisor. My past experience with the Volusia County Supervisor's Office is if you're already going to have a ballot, and basically they're not going to be printing any more paper, then you get a free ride. But if you are on a general election, okay? But if you're going to be forcing them to go to additional sheets, you're going to be paying the marginal cost for the additional sheets. You're not paying for the whole election or anything like that. So it's not an incredibly large number. Keep in mind, though, you put this on the 2022 general election ballot, it's going to be there riding with all of the constitutional amendments that the Florida legislature in their infinite wisdom have deigned to put on, along with everybody collecting, signatures.
These will be only for this precinct. If you're registered in this precinct,
Correct.
That's where you get these questions. All right.
When the supervisor's office puts together all their precincts, they break it up so that they can give out the appropriate ballot just to folks just as only city council elections would be on certain ballots and not for folks.
Well, I don't know, people from all over told me they voted for me.
Oh my goodness.
Port Orange.
That's the plan, at least, is how it's supposed to work. So, and again, I will suggest something, and unless you all have a lot of specific direction coming out of, additional direction coming out of this workshop, I don't know that we need to schedule a workshop next month necessarily to do all this, but what I would recommend, particularly on this one, beat this one up a little bit more in your head.
Yeah.
Because I believe you're correct, council member, that this would be the one that'd be of most interest to voters. And so
I don't think we're trying to get around something.
it's good to beat these up and maybe ask folks what they think of it, and we might do some rewording. But it's good sometimes to sit on these a little bit. You all have the time.
This is one of the ones that we would probably want to make sure that we have informational or explain it to people, or be open for questions if they have.
I would suggest it, yes.
It seems to me that just in reading this, of course, I'm a little close to it, and maybe I'm missing something, but it seems in reading this that people would think, well, this is good because city council is going to take control and have a policy manual, policy and procedure manual that they're putting in place, which means controls. I mean, it seems to me like that it would be perceived as a good thing as opposed to a bad thing.
And it very well could. Again, that's what I'm saying. It sometimes issues that may be concerns for voters are latent, and they'll come out on your fifth reading or seventh reading of it, or if somebody else reads it, you know.
How do you like the wording? I mean, would you?
Well, I was going to interject and ask a question.
You're a key.
Wait, one of the things I see a lot of cities do is not just have a finance policy. Most have a policy, we do, it's terribly outdated, but it's really overridden by existing charter language. So Lori and I, for 3 years, have been talking about revisions we'd like to make to our policy, but until the charter gets revised. So my real question is, should it be just a finance policy that's only going to require one reading by the council? I see a lot of cities do it as the charter says there shall be a purchasing ordinance, and then you spell out certain things in the ordinance, then the ordinance says everything else will be handled through a finance policy document, and then any formal changes are done through an ordinance that requires 2 readings, and that gives the public 2 times to view it versus 1 for any of those changes. So I'm fine with either one. We have a policy. Again, we're ready to update it and change it to whatever the council desires, but we're struggling with what we have now.
Kurt, it would seem to me like the way it would work would be you would write the policy, and then you would come to us, and you would explain it to us, and we would either agree with it or change something or whatever. So I think you would be the primary creator of the policy, the way you would like to see it, and the way you think it should run, and then you would present it to us for approval.
Yeah, I would
don't
just
think
say,
we're going to write the policy and then shove it down your throat. I think it would be
it's a lot of times I get asked questions from vendors usually, and they want to know, where's your code on it? Well, we don't really have a code. We have a separate document. Usually when you want to know things about the city and how they operate, you look at the charter or the code of ordinances. And so I would rather see us have a framework with the basics that say if it's $25,000 for bidding or whatever those framework requirements are, that it's in the code. That way the vendors, when they call us up, you're shaking your head, so I don't know.
Oh, no, I was going to try to break down what you're saying a slightly different way.
So is that in contrast to what is here, or tell me?
So what he's suggesting is, rather than just having all of these rules set out in a policy manual, that'd be subject to your approval, that at least the framework of your purchasing policy, procurement policy, however you want to refer to it, would be implemented by ordinance. So what's the distinction here? 2 readings, advertised for second reading 10 days before, a little bit more formality, public hearing, all that great stuff, okay? And then it sounded like you were thinking of a 2-tier structure here a little bit of, a purchasing ordinance, procurement ordinance, and then, implementing policies or something like this. My suggestion, since you have a little time, might be to think backwards on this. If what you currently have in place is not what you want to be, or you would recommend to them to be what it is going forward, it might make more sense. I don't mean to put work on you, but what we got.
I've been waiting for this for a while, so.
Well, good. It might make sense for staff to take a look at where do they want that to go, and does it firm up as merely a policy that's adopted. And typically, by the way, when you adopt something like this that isn't adopted by ordinance, you adopt it by resolution. It's just cover resolution that attaches to, here's our policy, okay?
Let me ask this question.
And
Oh, I'm sorry. Why is this even coming up on the charter? What if this was removed from the charter?
That's what they were trying to do.
so we could, there's a rhetorical reason, quite frankly. The primary reason why there's any reference to this at all, because there's no need that there be a reference in the charter for this. You have the home rule authority to set up your purchasing policies however you want. So
But
long
it
as
is in the
it's
charter now.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so
But can
if
we
you go
remove it?
saying, absolutely, if you can get the voters to do that,
We'd have to ask the voters to remove that, and
if
then
you
that's
say-
so suspicious.
you say to the voters, hey, all the rules that are in the charter about our purchasing, can we just remove them?
Okay.
Without mentioning, we're going to replace them with a whole bunch of procedures that we're going to be governing. That's why that second part's there. Because I could guarantee you, if you just said, hey, can we remove all the purchasing requirements in the charter? I can tell you how that one's going to go.
I like Kurt's idea about the code a lot. I think for our vendors, for anybody who wants to come in here and do business with us, you know, the fact that you can point them to the code where it doesn't look like it's one-offs, or, you know, you have to, I think it professionalizes the process.
It's up to you all, and again, I would suggest you should be responsive to what you're getting from your vendors. I can tell you in some places in the state that we represent, we get exactly that. Other places, they'll call and say, hey, what's your purchasing policy in your code? And we say, well, we'll send you our purchasing policy, it's adopted by resolution, and then they're good to go. But again, it's always useful to some folks when you can just point them on Municode. If it's on Municode, folks think it must be real, and there you go. So
Would you say we need to have a little bit more work on this particular?
yeah, I think what it would be just slight changes to reference to a purchasing ordinance is really the only changes we'd see. And John and folks in staff can chat about how this language ought to be, and then again, I would just suggest that the idea might be to have that cooking, because if you're going to put this on the ballot in 2022, you want that thing ready to go. And quite frankly, you probably want it already adopted prior to it, you know, have it adopted contingent upon it passing.
Well, let me ask another question. Is there any reason why we can't do it the way we're proposing right now?
You could do a lot of updates. You could come up with a new instrument that does a lot at least, of what you'd want to do, so long as it is conforms with and is consistent with the current charter restrictions. To the extent you were going to deviate from those, then it would deviate from those. But
One of the things, go ahead, Mel.
Can we get halfway there or three-quarters of the way there prior to this, Kurt?
Oh, I mean, we can come up with the ordinance and a supporting finance policy document. One of the things that I envision showing up in a policy is a lot more of the day-to-day operational stuff, almost like an administrative policy that helps our clerk at the front counter understand how they're supposed to handle situations. And no offense, but you don't need to be in the mud like that. To me, you need to be able to tell me, here's how we want to handle major purchases, here's how we want to handle credit card purchases, those framework, and then let us have an administrative policy document that says, here's how we're going to do all the day-to-day stuff, and we can amend that policy as we need to, as we change a credit card vendor or something and the policy changes, to come back to you frequently. You'll get annoyed with me actually with those changes.
But as far as I'm concerned, I think we should proceed with as much as we can where we're staying within the current charter to get to where you need to be. Does that make sense?
Well, no, the current charter is the wording below here that we want.
well, I guess what the vice mayor is suggesting, the thought is there's a lot of work that could be done. I'm speculating here. Tell me if I'm wrong. there's a lot of work that could be done in formulating a much more robust purchasing policy and all these things. And the only constraint would be, but it's got to be consistent with this half page of constraints.
Okay, all right, okay, I got
And
it.
then, once these constraints are lifted, then those constraints within that document can be lifted.
Okay.
So we'd be halfway there anyway, or somewhere.
This provision does not prohibit you from having a purchasing ordinance by any means, just so long as it is consistent with these clauses.
Okay, and I know we only have about 5 minutes left. What would you like to accomplish in the last 5 minutes? Do you feel like we got through the whole charter, and these are the only areas that stood out to you or Attorney Carey?
These are the only things that we've inquired of staff further about in experience of the last many years, where there have been recognized inconsistencies between the charter and your code of ordinances and so on. To go through in a hypothetical enterprise and find every potential inconsistency would be reading the entire code 6 times, and then we'd be only guessing, because these things come out in practical effects in history over time. So I think we've gotten at all those things that have been reported to us. And
What is next steps?
so next steps right now is I think we will put together some, I'm going to suggest John, the finance director, get together with the city manager and work up small tweaks, if there's no objection, small tweaks along these lines, that it would be a more fully fleshed purchasing ordinance, and then implementing administrative policies and what have you. And we can tune that charter provision up for that. The rest of them, if you all have any other tweaks or thoughts down the line in the short term of the next couple months, share them with John. And John's actually already put together an ordinance to put these on the ballot. Y'all don't need to pass that anytime soon, because you got a lot of time. But my suggestion, again, from a lot of experience on this, is let this age a little bit and then come back to it with fresh eyes in 2 months. And then when you read it and you say, what the heck did we do that? Because you're going to be thinking the same thing when it comes to November 2022. Give yourself a little time to come back to it, and if everybody's still on board, then you all can proceed forward.
And could we do that at a regular council meeting?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Wait, could I ask you a question? Have you had a chance to read everything that Lonnie's written on this subject?
Everything over time? I have
No,
not.
no, I mean, everything he turned over to you, some of it.
I read a document that I believe had Lonnie's changes in it and a number of other changes that I can't determine where they came from. And it included, and this is not a criticism at all, it's just not consistent with the way I tend to do it. It included a lot of, as I referred to before, changing happy to glad in it. So nothing in it screamed to me that y'all are legally in a bad way if you didn't make
Right.
some change or another.
It was my impression that he found more inconsistencies between the charter and the ordinances than you've identified, but that's just an impression I have. I haven't thoroughly read through it.
And unfortunately, it didn't have any commentary with it to say this is inconsistent because, or this is inconsistent.
This is how I feel, this is what I.
It's just a whole lot of deleting,
It was a lot of deleting more than anything.
which is well and good, but the mere fact that something was deleted didn't tell me much.
Yeah.
But that would still have to go on the ballot, delete that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the ballot would be a mile, yeah. Okay.
You talking about deletions in the charter or deletions in ordinances? Or both?
Deletions in the charter.
Okay, well, we thank you very much for your time today. Is there any other questions before we, once I say? No? Okay. I know you have to head over the bridge, tell Mayor Hall we said hello.
Will do.
If there's no other questions, we will end the meeting right now. We'll adjourn it, and then we'll pick back up at 6 o'clock for the regular meeting.
Thank you all.